Hey everybody, this is going to be part 2 of my dueling tier list. Today we're going to be going over one-handed weapons. So let's get right into this. Now the first weapon here is going to be the Dagger. Now the Dagger is very fast and does some decent damage, but it's also really short. Now when I make this ranking, I'm going to keep into consideration that this is on the Ambusher class. And with the Ambusher class, you get throwing knives. Now, I'm not the best with throwing knives, and I don't play Ambusher very much. So don't take my bad gameplay as kind of an indication of how well the weapon does, because I've seen some people do some crazy things with this. But I do think there are just better one-handed weapons that you can go with that aren't the Dagger. Not that you can't do some crazy things with it or anything, but it is really short, and the stamina damage isn't great. You can get outspaced very easily with this weapon, but you also have the potential to get those backstabs in, and it has a pretty deceptive special attack. But with all of that said, I do have to give the Dagger D tier. The Dagger is getting D tier because it is short. It doesn't do a crazy amount of damage on the light attacks or the heavy attacks. You're really looking to try to get a little backstab in here, and you are trying to look for the special attack to sneak that through. But if someone can read that, then you're kind of out of luck with this weapon. I will say though that this weapon does have really fast combos. When you actually do hit somebody with it, they don't really have a choice. They kind of have to react to what you're doing. But you can do the same thing with a lot of one-handers, so I'm not going to put too much stock into that. Alright, moving on here, we have the Shortsword. The Shortsword has a lot of the same benefits that the Dagger has, but it is slightly longer. It does relatively the same type of damage. I think it might actually do a little bit more damage than the Dagger, actually. I don't use it too often, but it's basically the same as a one-handed sword, but slightly shorter, a little bit faster, and that's pretty good. Especially on the Ambusher, they just can't really get much space away from you, because if they do try to run away, you can start chucking knives at their head. And just like with the Dagger and most one-handed weapons, you have an inherent advantage over fighting two-handed weapons, because if you just hold riposte and then riposte their attack, you can walk forward at them, and the only thing they can do is wait for you to do your next move. That's kind of the main strategy with a lot of these one-handed weapons. So in this tier list, that's kind of just a basic barrier of entry for these one-handers, is if they can play a good neutral game. The Shortsword can play a good neutral game, so it is going to go at a higher tier than the Dagger. So we're going to put the Shortsword in C tier. Next up we have the Kutars, and the Kutars are a very interesting weapon. They are basically a fist weapon. They aren't a one-handed weapon, they aren't a two-handed weapon, they're a zero-hand weapon, which makes them kind of cool. But they aren't that great. You don't stagger people when you hit them unless you use the special attack. And you also have a headbutt that is just worse than the normal jab. It's basically the same thing as a jab, but you can't jab collide with it. So you have to try to get them first with it. And it's also slower than the headbutt that you get when you get your arm chopped off. So it's just not a good headbutt. It's just a worse version of the jab, unfortunately. Now, the Kutars are very quick. There's no doubt about that. They're actually so fast that if you hit somebody or you miss a swing, you can pretty much instantly get your defenses up. So it kind of counteracts that issue with the weapon where if you hit somebody, you don't get any stagger on them. So it's not that bad, but if they attack at the same time that you attack, you're kind of out of luck. You're taking some hits and you're trading. So unfortunately, this is a weapon where you end up trading a lot of damage. So you have to really do a lot of really fast damage if you want to have any success. You have to be really fast with this weapon, moving in and out and not letting them get any damage in. One thing I like to do is fake a miss and then kind of bait them into attacking, and then you can special attack when they push you. It's pretty effective, and there's a lot of effective ways to use this weapon. But unfortunately for a dueling tier list, although you can do crazy things with it, and there are people who use this weapon so much that people just don't know how to deal with them. But unfortunately, it's still not like a top tier dueling weapon or anything. In fact, I think it's worse than the Dagger and the Shortsword overall. You can specialize in a weapon like that though, and if you specialize in it, that just increases the chance that people aren't going to know how to deal with you. It's one of those weapons that you can do that kind of thing with, that people don't use it enough to know how to deal with it. But if you know how to deal with a guitar user, it's pretty easy to deal with them, to be honest. It's a kind of a one-trick pony kind of weapon. So the guitars are going in D tier. We'll put them at the same tier as the Dagger. You can do very well with them. You can do well with all these weapons. Alright, moving on. Next up, we have the Hatchet. Now, I really like the Hatchet, not because I'm good with it, but because I didn't know it was so good, and I got destroyed with it during one of my episodes of Legends of Chivalry versus Short. I didn't realize how good this weapon was. I slept on it for a long time, but apparently it's like a one-handed battle axe. Who would have thought? It does very, very high damage, and especially to the stamina bar. If you're looking for an ambusher weapon that is very good at breaking people's stamina and putting up a lot of pressure, then the Hatchet is the weapon you're going to want to use. Now, the reason why I'm not going to give it a really, really good tier is because it is probably the shortest ambusher weapon too, which I know we're talking about one-handers here, but even if you're talking about a one-handed weapon, you still want to have some kind of range on it, especially if you're fighting it against a longer two-handed weapon. If you don't have the range, they can easily just backstep you and bait you into an attack and then punish you really badly. And you can get punished really badly when you're using a weapon like the Hatchet. So I'm going to be giving the Hatchet a B tier. You can basically two-shot somebody with the Hatchet, but that range is just debilitating. Next up, we got the Cudgel. Now, the Cudgel's a fun weapon. A lot of people like it, but it's just not very good. I would rather use the Dagger over this weapon because the range and the combo time is pretty much the same as the Dagger in a lot of ways. It doesn't even do that much more damage to knights, even though it's a blunt weapon. It still takes like 5 shots to kill a knight. So, while it has a little bit more range than the Hatchet, there's almost no reason to use this over a Hatchet. It just doesn't do enough damage for a blunt weapon. So it's unfortunate, but I'm going to keep this one quick. The Cudgel's going in F tier. I do believe that out of the weapons for one-handers that could be competitive, the Cudgel is probably the worst out of the one-handed weapons. And I'm not covering weapons like throwables, like the throwing axe, or the mallet, or the javelin in this video. So yeah, this one is probably my pick for the worst. Okay, next up we have the two-handed hammer. Now the two-handed hammer is very good. It's almost S tier good, but I think the only thing holding this weapon back from S tier is the fact that it is locked on Knight. So you have a class that has more health, yes, but you have a class that has less stamina and also less dodging capabilities. So you can get outstammed even with the shield, and you can't dodge as well. You don't have as good of mobility as most of the other one-handed weapon classes have. And I think that's the only thing holding this weapon back is the class that it's on. If this was a footman weapon, it would be S tier. But that being said, I do think the weapon itself is on par with the Morningstar or the Mace. It's actually a lot more damaging than those weapons, but it's just a little bit slower on the class movement speed side. So I'm going to be giving the Warhammer A tier. It's unfortunate because it does have the potential to be S tier if it just wasn't on the Guardian class. That being said though, it's a blunt weapon on one-hander, so I mean, it'd be as good as the Cudgel, right? But no, it's got crazy damage, very good speed, and it just puts on so much stamina pressure. And it's got things that are over the Cudgel, like it's got more range than the Cudgel too. Not by much. But it also has a very good special attack that is deceptively long range and will trick a lot of people into thinking that it's an overhead. Next up, we got the sword. Now this one's kind of like a jack of all trades. It's got great speed, great damage, great range for a one-hander. You know, it's got good neutral game. The range is actually kind of deceptively long sometimes, especially on those overheads and those stabs. It's got a lot of stuff going for it, but it doesn't necessarily excel at any one thing. Excel meaning like perform great at any one thing, not excel quickly. But yeah, it's got a lot of good things going for it. It's a great weapon, but I'm not going to be giving it S tier because there are weapons that just do a lot better than it. So we're going to be giving the sword A tier. I don't want the video to run too long, and the sword, it's a great weapon. There's not much else to say about it. So we're going to move on here. Next we have the Mace / Morningstar. I'm putting these weapons both on the same thing because they're basically the same weapon. The Morningstar has slightly more range than the Mace, but other than that, it's pretty negligible as well. They're basically the same weapon. This is probably the second best one-handed weapon in the game, in my opinion. It has actually like the fastest stab in the game, surprisingly. That's what I heard once anyways. And it also has probably the best neutral game besides maybe the Rapier. It's also blunt, so it has very, very fast combo times. When you hit somebody, they can't really do much. They have to just wait for you to finish your next attack. They can't even really jab you if you hit them most of the time. You can just excel so quickly after a hit that their jab is not going to connect, and you're going to get 2 free hits instead of 1. This weapon is one of those ones that can end fights really quickly. You can move around people's blocks really well with it. The stabs are surprisingly good, and the special attack is also very good. So we're going to be giving the Morningstar / Mace S tier for its very good damage, good stabs, good overheads, and it also has one of the best neutral games out of all the one-handers. And it's also not very difficult to use either, unlike some of the other one-handers that are in the lower tiers. Next we have the Falchion. Now the Falchion is kind of a medium tier one-handed weapon. It doesn't have great speed. It's actually very slow, but for a one-handed weapon it has pretty good drags. But that kind of goes against what you're looking to do with a one-handed weapon in general, how good of a drag you can do on somebody. You're mostly worried about how good your neutral game is and how you can lock somebody out who's using a slower weapon than you. So with the Falchion, you can do that, but other weapons can do it better. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with the Falchion. I would just say that other weapons do it better. So for that reason, Falchion is going to have to get C tier. It doesn't excel at anything really. And there is also one-handed weapons that do drags better than this one too. Gonna be a fast one on that one. Let's move on to the next. Next we have the one-handed spear. Now if you were around for the two-handed tier list, you're gonna notice that the two-handed spear didn't do very good. It got like the worst tier possible almost, but the one-handed spear is actually not terrible for duels. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's a lot faster than the one-handed spear, and it also has the best range out of any one-handed weapon, while also maintaining a very fast speed that other one-handers enjoy. So you can actually lock people out with this weapon, and it's very good. And the special attack is so good. The special attack has very good range and damage. Now the one thing that's bad about this weapon is relatively the damage is not very good. So you're gonna have some issues killing people quickly with it, but you can outspace them very well. I'm not going to give it a crazy good tier because it is a spear and it only has 2 attack types. It has a stab and an overhead. So if you're fighting somebody who is good at countering and also somebody whose weapon does a lot of stamina pressure, you're going to have a lot of problems. But I do think that if you specialize in this weapon, you can actually do very good with it. Another good thing with this weapon is the attack cancels. If you attack cancel like a bunch of stabs, then you can just destroy people. You can destroy their brains with this weapon. It's so good. You're seeing that on the screen a little bit in these clips. You can get sidestepped with it too, so there's a couple things that are bad about it, but generally I think if you play it enough, you can overcome the weaknesses of it and do very well. Overall though, I'm going to be giving this a B tier for the reasons that I just mentioned. Alright, moving on to the next one. Next up, we have the Rapier. And the Rapier is the best one-handed dueling weapon in the game. So yeah, it's going to be getting S tier. But let's go over why it's so good. The Rapier is extremely fast. It's a sword, but it's also blunt on everything except for the stabs. So it has the combo speed of a blunt weapon, but the range and the stabbing strength of the sword. So it's got the benefits of, say, like a mace, except for maybe the damage, but it's got the really high damage sword stab. So the slashes and the overheads don't do a lot of damage, but when you have something that can attack, cancel, and you can take 2's with it, like you can just steal initiative like no problem, and you can excel so fast that it's literally impossible to react to. This weapon, I think, should be banned just because of how stupidly broken it is. The last Trial by Blood was won by a Rapier, and a lot of tournaments are won by the Rapier, and it's just not really fun to play against at all. It feels cheesy to use, and it feels terrible to fight against. You can't even see the thing. When you're in a really intense duel, the ability to read what your opponent's going to do is really important. And with the Rapier, the thing is so skinny, you can't even really read what they're doing next. A lot of the time, you're just going to have to repost and hope for the best. You're going to hope that your enemy doesn't know how to kick, so that when you repost, you don't get punished. But the only thing that's bad about this weapon is really just that it doesn't do a lot of stamina pressure. But you can steal so many hits and excel so fast and do so much little pick damage, and you can also outspace most other one-handed weapons with it. So not only is it good against two-handers, it's good against other one-handers too. It's just literally the best one-hander in the game for dueling, and it's not bad in TO either. So yeah, S tier it is. Alright, now we got the Cav Sword. Now I really do love the Cav Sword. It's a weapon that you don't see used very often, but I like the Cav Sword because I really like the sound it makes when you hit somebody. And I also, I like the fact that it's a weapon that's one-hander, but you can also drag with it really well. But unfortunately, it's not the best dueling weapon. I like to think of it as a mix between a falchion and a one-handed spear. I like the long stab you can get with it, and it's actually really good at stab dragging. The slashes and overheads also have pretty good drags. Now, this weapon is really strong because it's very versatile, but it doesn't do what you're looking for a one-hander to do, which is really good neutral. What this weapon does really well is mix-ups. So it's kind of like a two-handed weapon in that way, but it doesn't do very high damage either. It's very good at spacing and putting on that kind of spacing pressure, but it's not very good at the stamina pressure. It also has a really good special attack too. So I'm also going to be putting that into consideration when trying to figure out where this goes on the tier list. I think the main issue you're going to have when you're using this weapon is people are going to sneak through gambles on you, especially if they're also using a one-handed weapon. So that kind of makes it really bad against other one-handed weapons, and it's not going to do very good against two-handed weapons that have better dragging potential than this weapon does. So you're still going to get messed up by two-handed weapons that can also drag really well, and you're also going to get messed up by one-handed weapons that can gamble better than this one. So overall, I'm giving it a solid B tier just because it is really good at the kind of mix-up playstyle. It does two-handed weapon things pretty well, and it does one-handed weapon things pretty well. So it's kind of like a mid-tier dueling weapon. Alright, moving on. Next up is the axe. Now, the axe is certainly a one-handed weapon. There's not too much that's exciting about the axe. Think of a hatchet that is slightly longer. Probably does a little bit more damage than the hatchet. That's pretty much it. It's still really short, which is an issue for duels in general. There are weapons that are longer than this. Just like the last weapon, this is a very average weapon. It's not super good, it's not super bad. You can play with it, and if you play with it correctly, you will get a lot of disarms, and you will kill a lot of people in like 2 hits. So, there are weapons that are better than it, yes. And there are weapons that are a lot worse than it. You can do very well with this weapon if you're good, and if you're bad, you can do very bad with this weapon. That's the thing with this game, though. You can take the best weapon in the game, and if you're not good at the game, you're still going to do badly. I think these mid-tier weapons are a good litmus test to see if you're good at the game or not, because it's not a crutch to use a weapon like this, but you're not going to get magically good by picking up this weapon. You have to be very aware of your spacing with a weapon like this. It is better than the hatchet, but I'm going to be giving it the same tier as the hatchet. It's going to be going in B tier. Hey guys, look, it's the Dagger's redneck brother, the knife. This thing plays very similarly to a Dagger in a lot of ways. It is a little bit faster than the Dagger, but I don't think it does as good of damage as the Dagger. Now, I might be wrong, but I know for a fact that the Dagger, you can get some backstab damage, and the special attack has some more distance. So the Dagger has slightly better range, but the knife has a slightly better speed. Either way, this thing is a gamble machine. If you can stay up close to people, you can completely just gamble them out of existence, and it's hilarious every time it happens. But you got to get that close to people to do it. There's not too much to say about the knife. It's a secondary weapon. On Vanguard, it's like a third weapon. Like it's like a weapon that you would never really pick to use in a duel unless you're trying to clown on somebody, which I do love doing on the occasion. Clowning on people never gets old in this game. So yeah, pick up your knife, pick up your dagger, whatever. Clown on some kids in duels. It's fun. But for a dueling weapon in a competitive format, we're going to be giving the knife E tier. It's not as good as the dagger, I don't think. So it's kind of just like a worse version of it. So it's going to have to go a tier lower. Alright, moving on to the last one. Last but not least, we have the Pickaxe. Now, a lot of people really underestimate the engineer weapons, and I think that most of the engineer weapons actually aren't very good. The Pickaxe is basically like a slightly different version of a Mace and Morningstar. It does chop damage instead of blunt damage, and the overhead is a little bit faster, but the stab is a little bit weaker. So it's got a lot of the same aspects, but it's also a little different. The overhead on this thing is so fast that you actually can't even react to it a lot of the time. But the reason that this isn't going to be S tier is because it is on the engineer class. So if you lose your weapon or get disarmed or anything like that, you are totally 100% dead at that point. There's no getting your weapon back most of the time in a duel. And I actually do think that is a big reason to not put something in S tier. Also, I think the fact that it has a weaker stab is another reason not to put it in S tier. Stabbing is great for getting spacing on people, and the stab on this thing is really bad. But the overhead is also very good too. I'm like super tempted to put it into S tier, but I just don't think I can do it. I don't see it used enough to really be considered an S tier weapon, and I think that's because if you get disarmed, you're toast. In a high level duel, sometimes you get disarmed and you want to have a backup weapon, and unfortunately with no backup, this is going to have to be an A tier, just a little bit below the Morningstar and the Mace, but I do think it's a very powerful weapon. Let me know in the comments if you agree with anything that I said. Let me know if you disagree with anything, and you know, I like a good argument, so maybe we can talk about that in the comments a little bit. If you think anything that I said was really dumb or anything like that, let me know your reasoning, and I will see you in the next one, guys. Peace out.